if I left anything with the audience, is how do we help people really understand that we are all created in the image and likeness after the likeness of God, and how we must value that, and how do we structure a society around that whole notion.
Welcome to Interactions, a podcast exploring how law and religion interact in today's world and throughout history. In this season of Interactions, Terri Montague and I, Brandon Paradise, engage with contemporary leaders and social change agents regarding the influence and convergence of Christianity, the law, and racial justice in their work. This podcast is produced by the Center for the Study of Law and Religion at Emory University in collaboration with CanopyForum.org. You are listening to the second of two episodes in which we engage with the Reverend Dr. Bernice King. Dr. King is a social activist who regularly speaks truth to power and is the CEO of the King Center, where she teaches the principles of nonviolent resistance, honors and shares her father's legacy, and protects against its misuse. If you have not already, we encourage you to listen to part 1, where Dr. King discusses her parents and the foundation they have laid for today's community of activists. In this episode, we talk with Dr. King about what it means to be committed to the principle of nonviolence in today's world. So one of the items I know that you're most focused on at the King Center is nonviolence as a way of life, which your father was deeply committed to. Can you please just share with us what you mean by nonviolence, how it relates to your father's work, and what you're doing to advance it?
My father was really an embodiment of love and action. For him, when he made that first speech before the black citizens in Montgomery that night, the first night of the protest, he said, I want them to know that we're Christian people. And he essentially talked about love and action. He wasn't calling it nonviolence at the time. And so we fast forward at the King Center and just studying him, decided, okay, what is a real definition of nonviolence as you think about Dr. King? And for us, we've captured it in these words. Nonviolence is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, acting, and engaging that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. We define it that way because we want to make sure people know that it's beyond just social justice. It is about interpersonal interactions and engagement as well, whether it be in your home, whether it be within civic organizations you work in, whether it be in the workplace setting, whether it be in some of our policy circles and political circles. It's a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, acting and engaging.
What are you doing today to advance the philosophy of
Right.
nonviolence?
Right.
And if you could share what trainings are available to help people come to live out nonviolence?
Yeah. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm trying to practice it myself. I'm just gonna be honest. I mean, we need models. That's one of the problems. We talk about things a lot in this nation and world, but there's a gap between what we say and what we do and how we live. So the first place is, I am trying to become an example of what that means, and the best way that I can do it to the world, obviously, is through a lot of my social media channels and how I communicate, because that's an area that we often don't associate with nonviolent communication, and why that's so important, because you want to make sure that people hear, and that it doesn't become about the argument, but it becomes about the truths that are being laid out, whether it be on both sides, that you can hear, what those truths might be. Because my father believed in nonviolence as he pulled it together, that they're threads of truth. When he studied all of those philosophers and and theologians and even sociologists, what he found is I can agree with about 3% of this, 5% of this. I reject the rest of it, but I'm going to extract this piece. So he was a great synthesizer of all these different thoughts and ideas, and bringing them into to a whole for him by saying threads of truth to lead to what for him was an ultimate truth. So that's the first thing for me, trying to be that example. Secondly, institutionally, trying to create an internal team that focuses on nonviolence as a way of life and creating a beloved community culture. It's very hard to get buy-in because one of the things I find in any teaching is that we have a tendency when people don't perfect it, it's like it's automatically discredited. And so what I mean by that is if I slip as a leader, all of a sudden people become dismissive of, well, this is not a beloved community culture. So you're fighting through all of the way in which we've been raised to believe that, once a person slips and falls, whatever that teaching was is invalid. And I'm one to believe that regardless of the leader, the truth is what it is. The question is this teaching valid? Is it the way we should conduct ourselves?
Those trainings are available at www.kingcenter.org. For those of
Right.
you who are listening and want these resources,
I encourage people not just do it once. Use it as a constant resource. It only works when you take it. You have to practice nonviolence every day. And it's not about them, it's about you. And that's the other hard part. Because people feel like, well, they're violent. It's not for the purpose of making them nonviolent.
tied to the idea of doing inner work and outer work
Exactly.
together.
Yes.
And this
Both.
so clearly connects to your father's identity as a minister of the gospel who took seriously the need to reform the inner character so that it goes out into the world and reliably practices nonviolence as a way of life.
Yep.
So after we do that inner work, and as we do that inner work, what is your sense of what is the unfinished business of the civil rights movement? Where do we direct the outer work? Your father talked about a revolution of values, a reordering of national priorities. Where do you see that needing to lead us?
I mean, you said some of the key things because I think most people would talk about the work of social justice, the work of equity, and I think all of those things are important. Um, but to me, the first work is that real inner work at the same time as you're doing the outer work. That we really do assess, our values. What are we putting first? Whether people are important and whether people are being treated, with dignity and respect and fairness, in all of our processes and procedures and practices. Because we come up with these wonderful, ideas, and even on the social justice front, when we're trying to bring about change, the means and ends still have to cohere. You can't get to a just outcome if you are practicing unjust means yourself. You don't want to become like those that you're saying, are unjust. So I think it's that revolution of values. I think it is continuing the work of creating genuine, as that Daddy called it, genuine equality. And I heard somebody say something the other day that I thought was pretty powerful when they were talking about equity. You really can't have equality without equity. That's the first thing. And the work of equity is really the process of getting to equality. It's the process. And so I think we're talking about economic equity in particular. When you say, where's this unfinished work? Well, in 1965, after the Voting Rights Act was signed into law, he turned his attention to the whole economic front, the economic inequalities, the fact that people did not have, you know, um, jobs, certain kinds of jobs. They didn't have certain kinds of access to funding, denied opportunities to develop wealth, um, and and the fact that we were relegated, to certain neighborhoods, and certain types of jobs. So economic justice is, I think, where the focus needs to be. But I say that carefully because we can correct everything. Like Daddy says, justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. But as we correct, even if we put these things in place, if we haven't done the inner work, we will undo it. I always think about how we have elected officials and we get all excited, either a president signing an executive order or even a certain body of legislators pass laws, forgetting that those legislators one day, will end their terms. Other people will come in, and the very thing that was ushered in could be shifted and changed under a whole new body of people, you know, um, because we haven't yet shifted our value system and who we are holistically as a people and a humanity, that at the core of any decision we make, when we usher in laws, that it's going to be people-centered. It's going to make sure it respects the dignity value of the person, so that we are not seeing this kind of, you know, fits and starts. You start down and then something gets undone, and you start undone, and then you have to go back again. It's just crazy to me. So I think the work is both in and out, but it's heavily on the I would say heavily on the internal work, but externally, the economic piece, because in every category, and I'm going to say this as delicately as I can, in every category, and I'm going to focus now on the United States of America, in every category, Blacks are still last. And as my father said, we still have half of the good and twice the bad in every category. So for me, dealing with racial inequity is very critical in trying to, I won't say finish, because we're still not going to be finished, but in terms of continuing this work, in terms of the journey that my father was on.
It's quite interesting that your father's primarily associated in the public imagination with his struggle against white supremacy and the fight for racial equality. But we know that from his earliest years, he was concerned about economic inequality. And in his later years, it appears the primary focus of his work was on ending the triple evils of racism, poverty, and militarism. Folks don't know, as well as they should, that he was a fierce opponent of economic exploitation, economic exclusion, and that the unfinished business of the civil rights movement, as you described it, is precisely what your father was focused on. In the latter years of his work, he advocated the need to rethink and restructure community life. Mm-hmm. He advocated for the then, at the time, radical idea of a universal guaranteed income program, including a bill of rights for the socially disadvantaged. Cities today across the nation are piloting guaranteed income programs. What programs or approaches do you think today would best advance your father's vision of economic inclusion?
Well, let me just say something about the universal basic income first. He also talked about it being pegged to the median income and not the bottom parts of the median income. And that if there was inflation, it would increase. So I wanted to say that so that people are clear that it was kind of dynamic in that way. And that's the problem. If you think about today's society, all of us are victims, really, of inflation. Um, how often, when inflation happens, do people's incomes adjust? I guess people say you don't want to adjust it down, and you never do that. But when do we make sure that the income of people is on par with the growth and development of the nation? We don't. We don't focus on it. It's never about what do we do about making sure that individuals have equity as we look at this global economy. When we factor everything in, we're taking care of everything, debt ceiling, all that. We're addressing this, that, and the other. But we never think about we still have a whole citizenry that this person doesn't even have a livable wage. This person is still sitting at the same salary. You know what I'm trying to say? It's this is what's problematic to me today, and how we are not thoughtful like that. And I'll give you an example personally as I get to this part with my father. I lead a nonprofit institution. It's very hard for nonprofits, to compete, with some of the corporate arena, the for-profit organizations in terms of, salaries, um, and in any other area, benefits. But because of my commitment and my heart and whose child I am, I'm thinking constantly about what can I do in reason to help change some of that in our environment. So we recently adjusted how much we cover for health benefits with the intention of figuring out at some point, how do we ensure that anybody who works at our institution, that they don't have to worry about that particular area of their life? So whether we're talking about covering up to 95% of their premiums, whether we're talking about setting aside something, a health type of fund that they may need to, be compensated for, their bill may need to be paid, because we don't want people to carry that burden. When I came in, people in our bookstore were making less than $10. And I said, no, we have to shift that. We're not able to do 20, 25. So, but I said, okay, nobody will come in under $15. So there are things intentionally that you have to begin to do within inside your institutions.
It is amazing that you have been intentional about providing that level of security for people working at the King Center. We understand how important a livable wage is to fighting injustice. How can we hold other businesses accountable for this?
Where if you're going to respect my dollar, you must respect me. And so if I invest in your company, then I want to make sure that I'm reflected in your company. One, that not only are people that look like me, and in this case, it was about Black Americans at the time, that you've employed Blacks, and that you pay them on par with their white counterparts, that you are promoting Blacks, that you are investing in Black banks if they're within the community where you sit. And I imagine as it evolved, they will be speaking of the board level. So you fast forward to today, because this was about creating equity for the Black community. Because remember, we were relegated to certain jobs, so we would never make more than a certain amount. So you fast forward today after George Floyd, all these corporations made all these commitments, but where is the accountability? Operation Breadbasket was an accountability for these corporations. They called on these corporations, give me, how many you have employed here. At that time they could say, without giving names, what is the payment? Um, you know, uh, Promotion. I mean, they asked all these critical questions. Then they made certain demands on those corporations and said, if these things don't change, then we are going to boycott. Nowadays, one person will just, something happen to one person and we just say, let's boycott. You don't do it haphazardly. It has to be around a plan, it has to be around a strategy. Um, and so I think today, if we're going to be effective on the economic front, we have to create apparatuses that can begin to hold these corporations more accountable economically, because we're not doing that. They're trying to do it themselves. They're trying to self-regulate. You can't do that.
Wow, that's powerful. And, I think there are some moves in the ESG movement,
Yes. Hmm.
environment, social governance, but even that still involves a lot of self-policing. And so I think there's still work to be done on that front. Wanted to see whether you have any kind of parting comments that you'd like to leave with us. As we think about this theme, law, Christianity, racial justice shaping the future, and where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Clearly, the answer is towards beloved community. Are there barriers we need to overcome as a community in order to really fully realize beloved community?
The one biggest thing that's been puzzling me lately, that I think is a big barrier, is the, and I've alluded to this earlier, um, is the lack of regard for dignity, you know, of human dignity. We've I don't even know if we've ever fully had it in humanity, but it's disturbing to me. I'm looking at a lot of things that are happening, and to me, it's about human dignity and how we give people that in this world, in our society. What strips us of that, and what provides us with that. Like my father, we have a book that we pulled together with my father's speeches to a lot of union organizations, and it's entitled "All Labor Has Dignity." So people having wages that are, you know, respectful of the value of the person. When I think about, and I don't want to go into the detail of this, but when I think about what's happened here in Atlanta with the public safety training facility and how there was no dignity in the process, and then we wonder why people are so furious. Um, because when people lack dignity, it creates angst, it creates anger, it causes people to just go outside of themselves, because
Mm.
the human soul and the spirit is crying out um, for dignity. You are crushing, you're damaging, you're harming the imago Dei in people, and because you're totally oblivious to it, And so, if I left anything with the audience, is how do we help people really understand that we are all created in the image and likeness, after the likeness of God, and how we must value that, and how do we structure a society around that whole notion, seeing God in people, and what does that really mean? When things are valuable, you treat them a certain way. You don't neglect, you care for them, you secure them a certain way. We're talking about public safety, we're talking about security. There's a certain way you secure, and you're very thoughtful about that. It's not a careless action. You're very intentional about it. And so for me, that's what I would share, because that's, I don't like it when I see people stripped of their dignity.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this time with us. I think we could probably talk all afternoon if you let us, but we won't. But we are certainly appreciative of all of the insights that you've shared, of the challenge that you have in your responses, left with us as we face a future that so often seems fraught with conflict and uncertainty and economic instability. There is still hope, but it's going to require discipline of us and make demands on us, the demands of love. And so you've given us much food for thought, much to think about, and strong marching orders. So we appreciate that. We appreciate you. And we look forward to continuing to remain in dialogue with you as you move forward in this important work. Racial justice, economic justice.
Thank you.
Thank you.